A real man craves responsibility. It takes a coward to run from responsibility. We're saying that this need of headship then searches for everything that could go wrong in the ship he's running. Therefore, would he want all the feedback he can possibly get? Absolutely. You know, I'll tell you right now, the male role does not like feedback. We'll get into this a little later on, and I'll give you the actual words that the male role uses for feedback to show you how much he hates it. Now we're getting into some beautiful steps. Number 8 is preparation. By the way, in our relationship that we're describing tonight, do we have a woman yet? No. If it were a salesman, do we have a customer yet? No. If we're an employer, do we have an employee yet? No. Everything that we've described so far takes place before you have the female role. If this is a young man and this is courtship, he has not started courtship yet. Believe it or not. By the way, there'd be a lot more happy and successful marriages if men would accomplish the first 9 steps before they thought about dating. Because are they actually capable of courtship until they are a man? The answer is no. What do we mean by preparation? This year I'm going to put in a beautiful organic garden. Now we might even have a snow yet. But yet the garden's already plowed. It's been disked 10 times. Is it prepared? There's no seed there yet. In other words, if I were describing male-female role relationship, I don't have any garden yet. But I have prepared soil. If I were going to hire an employee, I would have a job description already written out. I would have a position for him. I'd have people underneath him to go to work. I'd have job duties that he could do. Then after I had a position entirely set up, I would go out and hire someone to fill a position. Now, any type of a role relationship, I'd like for you to look at the preparation. Let's take a doctor and a patient. Before you go to the doctor, what's he done? 12 years of school? You suppose he's got a pair of scissors and some gauze? And a nurse? Before I go in to eat my evening meal tonight, what have they done all day? Cooks, waitresses, they even built the place, didn't they? Now, can you go on with every function you can think of tonight? Before we start with a female role, what do we do first? Set up the whole thing. This is interesting. You got to set up the whole thing because you're getting ready to hire a problem, which is going to take full-time jobs, so you can't afford any other problems until you get started on the big problem. All right, let's look at courtship. What do I have to do when I prepare? Well, have you ever heard of a man clearing trees off of a homestead before he had a wife and building a log cabin? Who did he argue with over the floor plans? And after he's built his log cabin, he has his livestock, he's found his own salt block, he has firewood cut, and then he thinks he's prepared to go courting because now he has something to offer a girl. In America, he's 14 or 15, and his dad's broke, mortgage to the hilt. He does not have any money, but does he need any? No, what he can't get on credit, he'll borrow from her. And away he goes to set up a marriage. Now, to prove this to you, he does what? He brings her back and carries her over the threshold into the motel. What effect is it to carry her over the threshold into the motel that you're going to have to get out the next morning because that's all the money you've got? And she has to borrow more money from her parents to pay for the divorce. By the way, part of the success of role relationship is adequate preparation before you secure the female role. Now, this will lead me into one of the problems of what happens to teenage marriages when they're living with either his parents or her parents because they are broke. By the way, this couple's worse than the couple I described that only had enough money for one night in the motel. Where do you suppose they spend their honeymoon? Well, it's either her bedroom or his bedroom, whichever parent will allow them to sleep in their house. You expect that marriage to really be a shining example of success? In other words, there's nothing wrong with teenage marriages. Not one thing in the world wrong with them if you've got a male role to start it off. In other words, if you can find a teenager that can fulfill everything we're going to describe tonight, I don't care if he gets married when he's 15. So you see, is it a chronological age? No. If you can fulfill everything we're describing at 15 tonight, then you should get married at 15. But if you have to be 28 first, you should get married at 28. And then the age of the man is far more important than the age of the woman. This preparation should be a beautiful step, and it's demonstrated in all nature. I have a horse, and I can always tell almost 3 weeks before that horse is going to foal. It'll make up a bag, and it'll be tight. You say, well, why in the world does the horse have to have milk 3 weeks before the foal arrives? Did you ever see little birds in the spring? Way before they're going to lay eggs, they have a nest. Does all nature teach us that the male role should prepare before the arrival of the female role? And we should do this as humans. We do this as far as new babies are concerned. There should be, before the new baby comes, a little crib and little tiny booties. And in case you don't do it, they'll have a shower for you. So step number 8 is actual preparation for a female role. Let's take National Cash Register as an illustration. I like to use them because they have a tremendous training program for salesmen. In fact, they're one of the leaders of all industries in this area. Let's say a young man this evening decides he wants to sell cash registers and he chooses NCR. They actually give him 2 years of training. They would send him back to Dayton, Ohio, and have him go through several buildings. By the way, this is interesting. He's not going to work in these factories, but yet they want him to know exactly how they put a cash register together. They want to know all the parts on this cash register. And after 2 years of training, they finally say he's prepared. Now he can meet a customer. Let's move on to step number 9. And we're going to give it 4 words tonight: selection, recruitment, courtship, conception. This simply means that I have everything ready, and I'm going to do what now? Go out and secure a female role. Now when we say selection, we're normally talking about salesmen selecting prospects. When we talk about recruitment, we're talking about an industry going out and hiring employees. We talk about courtship, we're talking about a man securing a spouse. And conception, we're talking about a married couple having children. It means that I survey all of the possible choices for a female role before I choose. It's actually an initiation of action on the part of the male role to secure a female role. If I'm a boss, it means that I actually put an advertisement in the newspaper. And it means that I have interviews. That people come who are interested in the job that I have to offer. Advertising would be another form of selection. But notice that selection is the responsibility of the male role. Now I'm sure that you've heard of a girl who thought she was supposed to do the selecting. In other words, she looks, she initiates the action, and I suppose after she asks him to marry her, she thinks that she can go ahead and play the male role, can she? No. In other words, if I am a customer and I walk into a department store and nobody seems to take the initiative to wait on me, and I'm going to play the male role, and I select the merchandise that I want, and then I find a clerk to take my money, I have not initiated the action. They built the store before I was born. They offered the merchandise. And let's assume in this particular situation I knock over a counter. and cause a big stir in the store. Who's responsible? Am I? No. The clerk that should have been there will probably be bawled out for not being over there helping me secure my merchandise without knocking the whole rack down. But can I be in blame at all? No, as a customer, I'm totally innocent because I have no responsibility. In other words, if I'm going to initiate action, I have to have responsibility. If I initiate action and there's no responsibility, I haven't initiated any action. Therefore, we say that the male is the only one who initiates action, and it's his function to do all of the selecting. All right, step number 10. He's selected her. So, the first thing to do is to ask her for a date. Or, if this is a customer, make an appointment. Now, notice how I'm comparing appointments and dates right across the board. Or if it's an employee, he schedules an interview. What we're doing here is we're having some preliminary interaction between two people who do not have role relationship. They're contemplating role relationship, but they do not have role relationship as of yet. Has she consented yet? No. She's going to look him over. I mean, she wants to make sure that this is going to be a good move on her part. The employee, has he consented yet? No, he's there for an interview and he's looking over the plant, looking over the one that's doing the interviewing. The salesperson makes the appointment. This is obvious that there's no consent because has he assigned order yet? No, there's no consent. The customer is going to see what he has to offer. So we call this step number 10 cultivation. Another word for it could be persuasion in a positive sense. Back to my garden plot. I've selected my seeds. Now what do I want to do? I cultivate my garden. In other words, I'm past the soil preparation stage. And by the way, I'm past the selection stage because the seeds are already selected. They're in the ground. Now I want them to grow, do I not? All right, now, after I have selected this particular prospect that was going to be my female role, there's an interesting thing. She doesn't know whether she wants to be or not. I mean, I have decided she's okay. But what's she think about the whole thing? After all, she's getting ready to do what? Give up every right that she will ever have on the face of this earth. Is that a big decision? And it's going to take more than the fact that you selected her for her to make the decision. We say, she's got to be sold on you. So now how in the world are you going to sell her? We can't have a trial run at the thing. That's out. By the way, some people in industry think you can. Hire them for 2 years and then find out whether it's going to work or not. By the way, it costs you a lot of money, a lot of hard feelings, and ruins the morale of your organization. When I mentioned there's no trial run, you were thinking of marriage, but would you carry it through all the rest of the way? Do you have trial run with children? Got Johnny here for 2 years, we decided it was a mistake. Send him back. You begin to understand in role relationship, do we have a trial run? All right, now, does this make selection more important? This makes it very important because I'm selecting forever. Now, this is the tremendous law of fair exchange. She is agreeing to give you every right to become a love slave to you forever to satisfy your desires in exchange for you to crown her queen. Oh, and give her everything else the queen has. But primarily, it's the crowning that's the exchange. Is this quite a lot involved here? All right, so I think we should move slow. I don't think there's anything wrong in an interview to go ahead and hire somebody after an hour's interview and maybe 3 days to check out the references. I think if it's going to be a situation of marriage, I don't see why you shouldn't spend a year at it. By the way, it won't help you, and you won't know them at the end of a year anyway. But it does give you a little more time for a little more of everything to show up. Now, what am I going to do during this period of time? When we're talking about a customer and a salesman, you've ever heard the expression whining and dining or red carpet treatment? These are little expressions to show you that I'm getting ready to make the customer think that I'm honorable, I'm worthwhile, I'm respectable. There's going to be some service here. I'm not going to leave the country after you sign on the dotted line. we're giving a little bit of security, a little to this particular female role before she goes ahead and says, all right. Now, what am I going to do in this period of time? Well, since there's no trial run, we do the next thing. We have what we call tokens of what's going to come afterwards. Another expression for it is a foretaste, or a part of the inheritance ahead of time. Now, has God done this to us? Do you really tonight have a pretty good idea what heaven's all about? You'd be surprised how long you could talk describing heaven tonight. In other words, have you been given several tokens of what you think your inheritance is going to be when you die? Of course you have. All right, now let's follow the thing all the way down. What should a husband give his wife as sort of a token of what's going to come after she gives up everything? By the way, when she gives up everything, she's lost, isn't she? So in other words, she's going to have to evaluate this idea, whether she should consent or not, by the tokens. All right, let me tell you what the tokens are. Candy. You ever given a box of candy? There's a real significance there, isn't there? In other words, this means what? After marriage, I'm going to give you gifts. Now, what kind of gifts? Well, in the initial stages of courtship, you don't give certain gifts like clothing. The candy, then, is a token that more precious gifts and more intimate gifts will come if you say it's all right. When the girl accepts the candy, what's she doing? So, I like the first token. Go ahead. Then the roses come. They happen to be red, which means true love. She accepts them. Every time she accepts, she's saying what? I like what I've seen so far. Show me more. Now, he walks on the street side. He opens car doors. In other words, he's setting up a whole stage of behavior to show her this is what it's like if you become queen. She begins to see, you know, this is not a bad life. I like all these tokens. And after all, a token means this is only 1% of the real thing. By the way, now this is what she believes. You ask your wife when you get home tonight, this isn't what she believed. That she was getting a 1% token of the real thing. Now, in most marriages, what percentage do you think it is? It's all of it. In other words, they really better enjoy the courtship. Because that's the whole ball of wax. He's not given any token. He's given everything he's got. And then after marriage, she only has the memories, you know. So she keeps thinking back of how wonderful it is. Boy, if God did this to us, what will we feel like when we get to heaven? Then you know exactly how your wife feels on earth. Some of you really for a moment got the feeling the way you'd feel you got to heaven, and heaven would be worse than earth. Everything good would have already been given. Would you want to go to heaven? Would she want to get married? Then if you haven't, have you deceived? You notice that all the yeses, uh-huhs, all the way through that were all from ladies. Cultivation and persuasion is what we're talking about now. In other words, this means that we show them as much as we possibly can what it would be like in real relationship without going in real relationship. You put out just as much as it's possible. Now, you can't give her your bank account. You can't give her the home. In other words, we can't do that until we know what? She's going to consent. Are there limiting factors of how much the tokens can be then? In other words, they have to be gifts of you. Now, after the consent, what's the gift? Everything. This makes the actual situation complete. But you have to have beautiful cultivation. I don't think we have very much trouble with cultivation. And I think there's a real reason here, and I'm sorry to say it's coercion. Because you know that if you do not cultivate properly, what will happen? He'll buy from somebody else, won't he? They'll go work for somebody else. She'll marry somebody else. So can you feel what's the motivation to do a good job of cultivation? You lose the whole thing, won't you? All right, now, what's the motivation, or what should the motivation be? Because you love her so much that you want to show her just as much as possible what it's going to be like. Now, if that's the motivation, what will she have after she marries you? Everything. But if the motivation was that's the only way you could get her, which is coercion, then what will she receive after that coercion is not in effect when you have her? Now, if you follow what I've just said back, you'll know whether you were cultivating or courtship under coercion or not. Some of you are thinking kind of deep here, but it really, in essence, means that she used coercion on you to get you to marry her. Because you actually would have a fear that if you didn't, would you have lost her to someone else? By the way, can you give advice to your son in his courtship if he starts courting on the basis of fear? If he starts fearing that if I don't do this, I'll lose her. You can always tell the actual climax of this type of thinking is, I've got to marry her right now. And I talk to him, I say, really, why? She'll still be alive 6 months from now. Oh yes, she'll be alive, but she won't belong to me. Then what's the motivation for marrying right now? Coercion. You'd be better off to do what with her? Go tell the guy, I'm through. It's all yours. I'm going to have somebody that'll wait for me how long? Forever. How successful are you going to expect a marriage to be if you're going to start off with coercion? No, in other words, if she loves you, she loves you. You tell her that I think it would be more proper if we would wait a year. Does this show you that real male role? Where's the fear? No fear whatsoever. In other words, I'm going to fix this up just the way I want. By the way, this ends all the arguments of what colors to paint the rooms, because who's fixing the house up? You are. You're preparing a wonderful surprise. And she says, where is it? It's a secret. When it's all ready, when it's all landscaped, when everything's just the way I want, you still can't see it. By the way, just think now, you're a lady here tonight, what a surprise this would be. After the wedding ceremony, you go on a honeymoon, and you still haven't seen this house. Now would the honeymoon be over when you came back? Would there be any kind of a letdown feeling when you come back to town? Well, you could just imagine, all the way back to town, she's so excited because now she's going to see what you've been working on for a full year preparing for her. I realize that some of these things don't make sense, but it takes a man to do this. And we don't have very many men. Most men are so afraid they're going to lose her. Like, I was telling this one guy, does your wife love you? He says, well, she says she does. I said, well, does she? He says, I don't know one good reason why she should. What kind of an actual self-image does he have? By the way, he hasn't done anything bad. You see, maybe he's a very honorable man. He makes a good living. He provides a nice home. In other words, he does everything a good man should do. He doesn't run with other women, has no bad habits. But what kind of an image does he have of himself? He's not worthy for any human being to love him, so that he can't figure out one good reason why his wife should love him. Does he become insecure then? Could he even be tempted with jealousy? In other words, in a real situation of a real man, would he be jealous? In other words, real manhood would have no fear, and without fear, how in the world are you going to be jealous? In other words, it makes you complete within yourself. All right? After we have finished the cultivation, then it's time for a very important step. And we call this step securing consent. I'm sorry to say that most marriages in the United States haven't done this yet. I'm talking about marriages that have been going on for 50 years. They still haven't taken time to secure the consent. I'd also say in most homes, have they secured consent from the children yet? No. And let's go back to employers, employees. Have they secured any consent? No, they're in contest every day. Now, how can I get him to do that? I know, we'll trick him. We'll maneuver him. We'll do this. And they sit around, they have meetings and management groups trying to figure out how are we going to get those employees to do this. One guy says, let's just face the facts. We'll go out and tell them, you either do this today or we're going to fire you. Another guy says, we can't do that. We've invested all this money in training. Another one says, well, what are we going to do? In other words, does this give you an idea of a male role that's sick? Obviously, what would a male role do? You go out here, you haven't done this, you don't want to do this, you don't want to be submissive? Go right over to personnel. This is what for? Am I going to get a raise? By the way, don't be surprised he wouldn't say this, because he doesn't know role relationships. He might think he's going to give himself a raise before the day is over. You say no, your check will be waiting. 2 weeks pay in advance. By the way, if I'm not a very strong male role, I'm going to try to do what with those 2 weeks pay? Well, I'm not going to take a chance of losing 2 weeks pay. I'm going to do what with him for 2 weeks? I'll get even with him for one thing. I'll show him I'm really the boss because I'll hold it over his head that I really did fire you. See, you know now I'm really tough. Plus, am I going to try to get every bit of work I can out of him? I mean, this is the final stages of a contest. In other words, this is when you're so emotionally involved in a contest you can't let go. You have to fight it to the very end. And by the way, if he's in a contest, what's he going to do to my whole work unit in 2 weeks? He'll destroy it. All my men will hate me. In other words, my only hope is, after I tell him to go over personnel and get his paycheck, I tell him that on your way, take your tools. Do I even want him to come back in the department? No, I want him out of there. In other words, a real man cannot cultivate actual warfare when he's got a productive job to do. You say, why do we separate securing consent from cultivation? Well, cultivation is when you prepare, but securing consent is when you make an active effort for them to say yes. In other words, after all the candy and the flowers and the moonlight, all the dinners and the food, everything, he finally has to say, will you? The will you is step number 11. The employer finally has to say, would you work here? The salesman finally has to say, may I have your order? Now this act is what we call securing consent. Now what are they consenting to? Watch it real close. Submission. Total, complete, absolute. Subject to every desire of the male role. Surrender, total. Subordination to the nth degree. By the way, if you think these are all evil words, did you know we even call employees subordinates? They don't call themselves subordinates. This is always interesting to me, but management calls them subordinates. And number 5, subservient. Now, if one of those words you don't like, remember they all mean the same thing. The only reason I list 5 of them is because normally I find one in the list that people like. After they sit there thinking, this is a wonderful word, then I tell them they all mean the same thing, and then they realize, well, I just better surrender. All right, let's go back through some of our basic relationships. With children, when should consent take place?